whispering world of silence, an eerie house stands where screams are forbidden and silence reigns supreme. Those who dare to break the hushed rule vanish, their souls ensnared by ghostly inhabitants lurking in the shadows. Enter if you dare, but remember, in this house, your silence is your only salvation. In the quaint cobblestone streets of Elmswood, a small gathering convened in the warm, amber-lit living room of Joanna, a local historian and the unspoken matriarch of the group. Her home, filled with antique books and artifacts, served as a meeting point for those enthralled by the mysteries of the town, particularly that of the Whispering Manor. Joanna, a woman in her late 40s, with an inquisitive glint in her eye, sat at the head of the oak table. She was joined by Alex, a young filmmaker with a penchant for the paranormal, Sarah, a skeptical journalist with a sharp wit, and Michael, a tech-savvy drone operator with a fascination for haunted locations. They were united by a common goal: to delve into the enigma of the Whispering Manor and create a documentary that would unveil its secrets. As the evening set in, Joanna spread out old maps and documents on the table. The group leaned in, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the table lamp. Whispering Manor, Joanna began, her voice steady, yet tinged with unease, is more than just a dilapidated structure. It's a repository of unspoken horrors and untold stories. She pointed to an old photograph of the manor. Built in the late 1800s, it was once the jewel of Elmswood, but as you all know, no one has entered it in the last 50 years. They say you can see the silhouettes of the lost souls at the windows, silently screaming into the void. Alex, his eyes wide with fascination, interjected. And that's what we need to capture. The essence of the manor, its eerie presence. This could be groundbreaking. Sarah, ever the skeptic, raised an eyebrow. Or it could be a wild goose chase. You know, the legends are probably exaggerated. Joanna nodded, acknowledging Sarah's doubts. Perhaps there's truth in the roots of every legend. The manor was built on a land that was said to be cursed by the local tribes. They believed it was a place where the veil between our world and the spirit world was thin. Michael, who had been fiddling with his drone controller, looked up. Do we have any idea about what kind of curse it is? Something that could give us a lead on how we approach this? The details are murky, Joanna replied, sifting through her papers. But it is believed that the curse was cast to avenge a betrayal, something unjustly in a family's history, leading to a vengeful spirit binding itself to the house. The group fell into a contemplative silence, each lost in their thoughts about the upcoming expedition. Joanna finally broke the silence. We need to be careful. If we're going to uncover the truth about the Whispering Manor, we must respect its history and the forces that may still linger there. With a plan beginning to form, the group agreed to meet at dawn. They would venture to the Whispering Manor, armed with cameras, recording equipment, and an unwavering desire to unveil the shadows of the past. As they departed, the wind outside picked up, whispering through the trees as if carrying a secret from the manor itself. Little did they know, their journey would be more harrowing and revealing than any of them could have imagined. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink and gold, the team gathered at the edge of the overgrown path that led to the Whispering Manor. The air was crisp, and a thin mist hovered over the ground, lending an eerie atmosphere to the beginning of their expedition. Equipped with their state-of-the-art cameras, drones, and an air of determination, they approached the manor with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The manor itself loomed in the distance, its once grand facade now marred by decay and neglect. Let's get everything rolling, Alex announced, his camera already capturing the surrounding scenery. Remember, We need to document every angle, every possible entry point. This footage is crucial. Michael piloted his drone, sending it soaring above the manor, its camera panning over the decrepit roof and the surrounding barren landscape. Sarah, meanwhile, walked along the perimeter, her handheld camera meticulously recording the cracked walls and the boarded-up windows. The manor stood silent, an imposing sentinel guarding untold secrets. Its windows, dusty and broken, offered no glimpse into the darkness within. As the drone hovered near a window, Michael squinted at his controller's screen, hoping for a sign, a movement, anything. But there was nothing. Just the silent, eerie stillness of the abandoned house. After several hours of filming, the team regrouped. "I don't get it," Sarah said, frustration evident in her voice. "There's nothing. No movements, no shadow, nothing that Legends talked about." Alex reviewed his footage, scanning through the frames with a growing sense of disappointment. "It's like the manor is just a manor. Maybe we're in the wrong place." The entrance to the manor, a heavy wooden door, was securely locked, its padlock rusted but firm. "We can't break in," Joanna said firmly. "We need to respect the law and the history of this place. Let's head back and review everything thoroughly. There might be something we've missed." As the team packed up, the manor stood unmoved, its secrets tightly sealed behind its decaying walls. The journey back was quiet, each member lost in their own thoughts, wondering if their quest was in vain. But at Joanna's house, they gathered around the large screen, playing back the footage. The high-definition images showed nothing but the lifeless exterior of the manor, the drone footage offering aerial views of a silent, unyielding structure. "It's like the manor's mocking us," Michael muttered, disappointment lacing his words. "We can't give up yet," Alex said, trying to inject some optimism into the group. "Let's plan another visit, maybe at night. They say that's when the manor truly comes alive." As they left for the night, a sense of unease lingered in the air. The Whispering Manor, in its silent vigil, had given away nothing. But the team was not ready to surrender. Little did they know that the manor was far from done with them, and their next visit would be far more than they bargained for. The evening found Joanna alone in her study, surrounded by piles of old books and manuscripts, the weight of her thoughts as heavy as the silence in the room. "I need some evidence," she murmured, a mix of determination and worry in her voice. She feared her team might lose interest in the documentary if they didn't uncover something soon. Resolved, Joanna grabbed her camera and a small flashlight, setting out into the night towards the Whispering Manor. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the path, making her journey feel even more solitary and foreboding. Upon reaching the manor, she set up her camera, aiming it at the windows. The manor, bathed in the moonlight, seemed to take on a life of its own, its walls whispering secrets of ages past. Joanna's heart raced as she scanned the windows with her binoculars, and then she saw it. An image of an old woman, her face contorted in a silent scream, appearing in the top-floor window. Gasping, Joanna quickly aimed her camera at the window, but the image had vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Her heart pounding, she approached the manor's entrance, only to find the door slightly ajar, the padlock and chains lying broken on the ground. "Hello?" Joanna called out tentatively as she stepped inside. The interior of the manor was engulfed in an unnatural silence, so profound that even the sounds from outside ceased to exist. Her flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing dust-laden furniture and cobwebbed corners. Then she saw it again, the figure of the old woman, draped in tattered rags, moving towards her at an alarming speed. The ghostly woman's mouth was wide open, as if screaming, but no sound emerged. Panic surged through Joanna, and she turned to flee. But the layout of the manor had inexplicably changed, the corridors twisting into a labyrinth maze. The next morning, Joanna's friends, worried after not hearing from her, arrived at her house. Alex knocked on the door, calling her name, but there was no answer. They searched the house, finding her study littered with research on the manor, but Joanna was nowhere to be seen. "Something's wrong," Sarah said, a sense of dread settling over the group. "We need to go to the manor. She might have gone there." As they hurried towards the Whispering Manor, a sense of foreboding gripped them. The manor, once a subject of their documentary, had now become a much more personal and terrifying enigma. Joanna's fate, intertwined with the mysteries of the Whispering Manor, was yet to be uncovered, and her friends were about to step into a realm beyond their wildest fears. Under a sky heavy with clouds, Alex, Sarah, and Michael arrived at the Whispering Manor, a sense of urgency propelling them forward. The manor, in the bleak light of day, stood as a silent sentinel, its secrets locked behind walls of decaying stone and wood. They scanned the exterior, their eyes searching for any sign of Joanna. The windows, with their cracked panes and dusty seals, offered no clues. "She has to be in here somewhere," Michael said, his voice tinged with worry as he flew his drone around the property, hoping for a better vantage point. Approaching the front door, Alex examined the lock and chains. "It's bolted shut, just like when we were here the other day," he announced, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness. "There's no way she could have gotten in here." Sarah, her brow furrowed in concern, added, "Let's head back. We need to think things through, figure out what to do next. Maybe she went somewhere else." As they turned to leave, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path, they remained oblivious till a chilling scene above them. In the top floor window, a faint, ghostly image appeared. It was Joanna, her face twisted in a silent scream, her hands pressed against the glass, as if desperately trying to reach out to her friends. But her screams went unheard, lost in the void of the manor's curse. The image of Joanna flickered like a candle flame in the wind, before vanishing once again into the shadows of the house. The trio walked away, the manor looming in the background, its windows like vacant eyes watching their retreat. Unbeknownst to them, they had just missed a vital clue to the mystery that had now enveloped their lives. The Whispering Manor, with its silent walls and hidden terrors, had claimed another soul, and its appetite for the unknown seemed far from sated. Back in Elmswood, the friends exhausted every avenue in their frantic search for Joanna, but it was as if she had vanished into thin air. The feeling of unease grew stronger with each passing hour. "We need to get into that manor," Michael insisted, his voice laced with determination. "She may have gotten trapped inside. Something's wrong. I can feel it." "You're talking about breaking and entering," Sarah countered, her tone laced with concern and disbelief. But Alex, driven by a mix of worry and resolve, was already on his feet. "Let's go," he said firmly. "I just can't sit here and do nothing." Sarah hesitated, torn between fear and the urge to help. "I'll stay here," she finally said, "in case she calls or comes home." So Alex and Michael set off towards the manor, the weight of their mission pressing heavily upon them. As they approached the imposing front door, they tried to break the lock, but the chains held strong, unyielding to their efforts. "There's a broken window around the back," Michael remembered, recalling his drone footage. "We can get in through there." Carefully, they maneuvered through the cracked window, Michael leading the way. As he stepped inside, he was immediately struck by the eerie silence that enveloped the manor. The sounds of the world outside seemed to have been swallowed whole by the oppressive stillness within. Alex followed suit, clambering through the window. He opened his mouth to speak to Michael, but no sound came out. Confused and alarmed, Michael tried to respond, but he too found himself enveloped in the same inexplicable silence. Panic began to set in. Alex, his eyes wide with fear, turned to escape through the window they had entered, but it was firmly shut, locked from the outside world. In desperation, he wrapped his hand in his jacket and punched the window, hoping to shatter it. But the glass was as hard as steel, unyielding to his efforts. The two men stared at each other in terror, their silent screams echoing in their minds. Then, from the shadows of the long, dark hallway, a figure emerged. An old woman, draped in tattered rags, floating towards them with a ghostly speed. Her mouth was open in a silent scream, her face twisted in agony and despair. Alex and Michael, trapped and voiceless, could only watch in horror as the spectral figure drew closer, its silent scream a chilling reminder of the manor's dark secret. The reality of the situation was now terrifyingly clear. They were not alone in the Whispering Manor, and escape might not be an option. As the hours ticked by with no word from Alex or Michael, Sarah's worry turned into a gnawing sense of dread. She attempted to call their phones repeatedly, but each call went unanswered, echoing the void of uncertainty. The silence from her friends was deafening, and she knew she had to take action. Determined to uncover more about the Whispering Manor, Sarah turned to the internet, sifting through the layers of urban myths and ghost stories that shrouded the house's true history. It was then that a spark of inspiration struck her. She decided to delve into the records of the previous owners of the manor. Her search led her to the Dwights, an old family with deep roots in the town's history. She scoured through the archives and public records, piecing together the fragmented past of the family. There were no living relatives, but in her search, Sarah stumbled upon a chilling tale. The story spoke of Mr. Dwight, a tyrannical figure who imposed a cruel rule of silence over the women and servants. If anyone dared to speak, they were subjected to brutal floggings. The tale took a darker turn, with the account of the Dwight children, who in a fit of vengeance had murdered their father after discovering he had flogged their mother so severely that she lost her ability to speak. Abigail Dwight, Sarah whispered to herself, a shiver running down her spine. She may be the key to this. Armed with this new knowledge, and a resolve steeled by fear for her friends, Sarah decided to confront the horrors of the manor alone. She gathered a few essential tools, including a camera and a voice recorder, in hopes of documenting anything she might encounter. As she approached the manor, the sun was setting, casting long, ominous shadows across the path. The manor stood in front of her, its windows dark and foreboding. With each step, Sarah felt the weight of the manor's tragic history pressing down on her. She found the same broken window through which Alex and Michael had entered, and climbed through, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence enveloped her immediately, a suffocating blanket that seemed to absorb all sound. Sarah moved cautiously through the dimly lit corridors, her flashlight dancing off the decrepit walls and faded portraits. She could feel the oppressive atmosphere of the manor, as if the very air was thick with the whispers of the past. "Abigail Dwight!" Sarah called out softly, her voice quivering in the silence. "I know your pain, I'm here to help." As she ventured deeper into the manor, Sarah could feel the presence of something unseen, a lingering sorrow that permeated the air. She knew that whatever secrets the Whispering Manor held, she was about to come face to face with them. Her friend's fate hung precariously in the balance as she stepped further into the heart of the darkness. Sarah's heart raced as she entered the dining room, her flashlight illuminating the grand, dusty space. There, she witnessed a ghostly apparition that made her blood run cold. A man lying dead at the dining table, evidently poisoned. Standing over him were two spectral figures, a young woman and a young man dressed in 18th century clothing, their faces etched with both horror and relief. As quickly as the image appeared, it faded away, but not before the young adults turned their ghostly gazes towards Sarah, acknowledging her presence. The silence in the manor was overwhelming, a stark reminder that the world outside no longer reached her ears. With each step, Sarah felt as if she was delving deeper into the manor's haunted history. Moving cautiously, she continued through the house, eventually entering the kitchen area. There, she was confronted with three more ghostly figures, their faces and bodies marked with the scars of whippings. They looked at Sarah with sorrowful eyes, and one by one placed a finger to their lips in a silent gesture of shushing. The message was clear. Silence was a rule, a curse that bound them. Terrified, Sarah quickly exited the kitchen. Her search for her friends led her upstairs, where the atmosphere grew even heavier, the shadows deeper. Reaching the top of the stairs, she noticed one of the doors slightly ajar. With a deep breath, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by the fading light coming through the window. In the center, on the floor, sat an old woman, her ghostly form weeping in silence. As Sarah watched, the old woman lifted her head, her face contorting into a silent scream, a chilling image of fear and desperation. Abruptly, the old woman's expression changed to one of intense fear. She looked past Sarah towards the door, then back at her, and mouthed a single word with urgent clarity. "Hide!" Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to look behind her, expecting to see some new horror. The old woman's warning was clear, and Sarah knew she had to act quickly. The manor was revealing its dark past, but it also held her friends somewhere within its cursed walls. As she searched for a hiding place, Sarah's mind raced, piecing together the tragic stories the manor whispered, hoping it would lead her to Alex, Michael, and Joanna, and to a way to break the suffocating silence of the whispering manor. Crouching in the cramped space of a small cupboard, Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as the ghostly image of the old woman faded away, leaving her in a suffocating silence. Peering through a gap in the cupboard, her eyes widened in fear at the sight that unfolded before her. In the center of the room stood a menacing, spectral figure of a man, his expression stern and unyielding. He clutched a whip, which he rhythmically struck against his hand. A chill ran down Sarah's spine as she realized this was Mr. Dwight, the tyrant of the manor, whose presence still dominated the house, even in death. His ghostly visage symbolized the oppressive silence that had cursed the manor. As quickly as it appeared, the apparition vanished, leaving Sarah alone again in the eerie quietude. She cautiously emerged from the cupboard, her every move silent in the manor's unnerving stillness. Approaching the window, she attempted to scream for help, but no sound escaped her lips. The manor's curse of silence was absolute. With a growing sense of dread, Sarah ventured back down the stairs, her steps leading her to an old basement, a part of the manor she hadn't explored yet. The air grew colder as she descended, the weight of the house's tragic history pressing down on her. In the dim light of the basement, she saw them. Her three friends, Alex, Michael, and Joanna, stood motionless, facing the wall, their backs to Sarah. Frantically, she tried to call out to them, but her voice was swallowed by the silence. In unison, they turned towards her, their faces pale and haunted. Then, in a chilling moment, each raised a finger to their lips in a silent shh, before turning back to face the wall. The realization hit Sarah with terrifying clarity. Her friends were trapped, bound by the same spectral silence that gripped the manor. The curse of Mr. Dwight lingered, a relentless force, ensuring that no voice could be heard within these walls. Sarah's mind raced as she stood in the gloomy basement, surrounded by her motionless friends. She needed to find a way to break the curse, to release them and herself from the manor's grasp. The key, she knew, lay in the manor's tragic past and the spirits that haunted its walls. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah steeled herself for the daunting task ahead, to confront the manor's ghosts and uncover the secret to break in its eerie silence. Breathless and terrified, Sarah spun around to find Mr. Dwight, standing ominously behind her, his long black whip in hand. His face was a mask of stern, unyielding terror. Without a moment's hesitation, he raised his arm and brought the whip down on Sarah with a vicious strike. She felt a searing pain as a bloodied mark appeared on her face. She tried to scream, but the manor's curse held her voice prisoner, leaving her in silent agony. As Mr. Dwight raised his whip for another strike, Sarah darted past him, her every instinct screaming to escape. She had a sudden thought. The dining room. The sight of Mr. Dwight's demise. Maybe, just maybe, there was hope there. Bursting into the dining room, she was met with an oppressive energy, different from anywhere else in the house. Mr. Dwight materialized in the center of the room, his whip ready to unleash more pain. In a desperate move, Sarah grabbed a silver serving plate and hurled it at the ghostly figure. It passed right through him, but as it crashed against the wall, it produced a loud, resounding sound. To her astonishment, Mr. Dwight clutched his ears in pain. Seizing the opportunity, she smashed a china plate on the floor, the crash echoing through the room. Each sound seemed to weaken the ghostly tyrant as he fell to his knees in agony. Sarah continued her assault, breaking a cup, then a smaller plate, each crash a symphony of pain for Mr. Dwight. But soon, there were no more plates to throw. She tried to scream, but her voice was still trapped in silence. Racing to retrieve the silver serving dish from across the room, she felt the cruel lash of Mr. Dwight's whip across her back. She fell, each subsequent strike pushing her further into darkness. As she lay there, consciousness slipping away, the last thing she saw was Mr. Dwight's ghostly form, his dominance over the manor unbroken. Days later, a group of curious friends stood outside the Whispering Manor, discussing the old ghost stories. "Nothing but kids' tales," one of them remarked dismissively. As they walked away, lost in laughter and skepticism, they failed to notice the ghostly image of a young woman in the top window. Sarah, screaming in eternal silence for help. And so, the Whispering Manor continued its silent vigil, its secrets and horrors trapped within, waiting for the next unwary soul to uncover its tragic past. The night was thick with darkness, and Sarah and Mark sped down the desolate highway, their headlights slicing through the gloom. The couple, on a road trip to celebrate their anniversary, had taken a detour through the scenic countryside. Seeking adventure of unknown paths, they laughed and chatted. The winding roads grew unfamiliar, and the GPS signal on their phone dwindled to nothing. "I think we might be lost," Mark admitted, glancing at the map on his phone. "But it's an adventure." Sarah chuckled nervously, her eyes scanning the dense forests surrounding them. "As long as we find our way back soon, I don't want to be wandering through the woods in the dark." Just as Mark was about to agree, the car's navigation system crackled to life, its robotic voice suggesting a forgotten road and a shortcut to their destination. Intrigued by the prospect of adventure, they decided to follow the eerie directions through a narrow, overgrown path. As they ventured deeper into the woods, The trees close around them, casting elongated shadows that seemed to dance in the dim moonlight. The atmosphere grew thick with an unsettling tension, but the couple pressed on, reassured by the navigation system's insistent directions. The car's headlights flickered momentarily as they turned a bend, revealing an old-looking hitchhiker standing by the roadside. His silhouette was haunting against the backdrop of twisted branches and tangled vines. Despite initial hesitation, the couple's compassionate nature prevailed, and they decided to offer the mysterious stranger a ride. The hitchhiker, clad in tattered clothing, gratefully accepted, claiming to know a shortcut that would lead them out of the maze of trees. As he settled into the back seat, the air in the car seemed to change, becoming heavy with an otherworldly energy. "You're lucky you found me," the hitchhiker murmured, his voice carrying an eerie weight. "This road is not on any map, and only those lost can truly navigate it." As they drove on, the dense canopy above swallowed the moonlight, casting an oppressive darkness over the forgotten road. Sarah's gaze flickered to the rearview mirror, where the hitchhiker's eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. Mark's grip on the steering wheel tightened, an unspoken tension settling between the couple. "Do you think he's leading us the right way?" Sarah whispered to Mark, her voice barely audible above the rustling leaves outside. Mark shot her a glance. Uncertainty etched across his face. "I'm not sure, but the GPS hasn't steered us wrong before." As the car wound its way through the twisted path, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows within the vehicle were moving independently, their shapes elongating and contorting. The hitchhiker, seamlessly oblivious to the couple's unease, stared out of the window, his gaze fixed on the shifting darkness beyond the trees, as if he was looking for something or someone. "Do you know this area well?" Mark finally asked, trying to break the silence that hung heavy in the car. The hitchhiker's response was cryptic. "I've been here for a long time. Time loses meaning in these woods, but I know the way out for those who are truly lost." Sarah exchanged a wary glance with Mark, her suspicions growing like shadows around them. The air inside the car grew colder, and the rhythmic hum of the engine seemed to harmonize with an eerie melody that lingered just at the edge of their perception. As the couple continued to navigate the forgotten road, doubt crept into their minds like creeping vines. The hitchhiker's presence felt more like a spectre, and the path he led them on seemed to twist and turn with an unnatural, unpredictable rhythm. Mark decided to confront the hitchhiker directly. "How did you end up here? What happened to you?" A haunting smile played on the hitchhiker's lips. "We all have our tragic tales, don't we? But in these woods, it's not about the beginning. It's about the endless cycle of the night." Sarah shivered, exchanging a worried glance with Mark. The once charming adventure now felt like a descent into a nightmare, and the shadows of doubt that clung to the couple deepened with every passing mile. Little did they know that the true horror of the Forgotten Road was only beginning to unfold. The Forgotten Road stretched on like an endless ribbon, its twists and turns echoing the growing tension within the car. Sarah and Mark, once united in their sense of adventure, found themselves ensnared in the web of doubt spun by the mysterious hitchhiker. As the night wore on, the atmosphere in the car became oppressive, thick with an unseen force that seemed to manipulate the very fabric of their thoughts. The hitchhiker's presence, like a shadowy puppeteer, pulled at the strings of their emotions. "You're the one who insisted on taking this road in the first place," Mark muttered, his eyes darting nervously to the hitchhiker in the back seat. Sarah shot him an accusatory look. "I trusted you when you said it was a shortcut. Now who knows where we're going? This guy could be leading us in circles for all we know." The hitchhiker, still staring out the window with an otherworldly detachment, spoke in a low, haunting voice. Arguments fester in the hearts of those who lose their way. The woods feed on discord, on the fractures in the bonds that once held you together. You never listen, Mark. We're lost because of your stupid decision to trust a stranger in the middle of nowhere, Sarah accused, her voice raising. Mark clenched his jaw, the hitchhiker's influence magnifying his irritation. "Oh, right, because this was all my idea. You could have spoken up at any time if you had a better plan." The hitchhiker remained eerily silent, his present a silent instigator of the growing discord. Shadows seemed to dance in the corners of the car, mirroring the couple's escalating argument. As the bickering intensified, the surroundings outside the car transformed. The trees, once a picturesque backdrop, now twisted and contorted, their branches reaching out like accusing fingers. The forgotten road seemed to ripple with an otherworldly energy, responding to the disharmony within the vehicle. The atmosphere in the car had become an unsettling blend of tension and spectral energy as Sarah and Mark continued down the forgotten road. Shadows clung to the edges of their vision, and the hitchhiker's influence tightened its grip on their minds. As the headlights cut through the inky darkness, the couple's eyes widened with horror as they saw ghostly figures lining the sides of the roads. Transparent faces peered out from the depths of the trees, their eyes pleading for salvation. Who are they?" Sarah stammered. The hitchhiker, his demeanor unchanging, responded cryptically. "Lost souls, trapped in the same eternal loop. They seek a way out, but there is no escape. Do not be swayed by their desperation. Their fate is sealed, just as yours." Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated through the spectral crowd. "We can't just leave them here. Maybe we can help them. Maybe there's a way to break this curse." The hitchhiker's eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity as he warned, "No good comes from interfering. Your only duty is to follow the road. To stop is to invite the same fate upon yourselves." Despite the warning, the couple's empathy overwhelmed them. They couldn't bear to ignore the tortured souls on the roadside, their outstretched hands and hollow eyes pleading for release. "Mark, we can't just abandon them. Maybe if we help them, we can find a way out for all of us," Sarah insisted, her gaze fixed on the spectral figures that seemed to multiply with every passing moment. Mark hesitated, torn between compassion and the hitchhiker's ominous advice. "I don't know, Sarah. This feels wrong. We're supposed to stick to the road." The hitchhiker's voice took on a commanding tone. "Stay on the path. Do not let their despair cloud your judgment. To save them is your doom." But the couple, driven by a shared sense of humanity, couldn't resist the impulse to help. As they slowed down to offer a ride to the ghostly figures, the air around them crackled with an otherworldly energy. The moment the first phantom touched the car, a chilling wind swept through the vehicle, and the woods seemed to come alive with mournful wails. The moment the couple opened the car doors to offer solace to the spectral figures, an icy wind swept through the vehicle, chilling them to the bone. The ghostly phantoms, once pleading for help, transformed into malevolent entities. Their hollow eyes now glowed with a sinister hunger, and ethereal hands reached out with a desperate intensity. In a blink, the atmosphere shifted, and the couple found themselves surrounded by the haunted souls. Their air buzzed with spectral energy as the phantoms clawed at the couple, their touch draining the warmth from their bodies. The hitchhiker's warnings echoed in their minds, drowned out by the anguished cries of the tormented spirits. Panicking, Sarah and Mark felt their strength wane as the ghostly entities attempted to draw them into the depths of the supernatural loop. The once idyllic car now felt like a cage, the phantom's whispers weaving a symphony of despair. Just as the couple began to lose hope, a sudden burst of light erupted from the darkness. The hitchhiker, his figure bathed in an otherworldly glow, materialized beside them. His outstretched hand emitted a radiant energy that pushed back the encroaching phantoms. "Do not be deceived by their desperation. They seek to bind you to their fate," the hitchhiker intoned, his voice cutting through the spectral cacophony. The hitchhiker's intervention brought a moment of reprieve. and the couple stumbled back into the safety of their car. The phantoms, thwarted but not defeated, circled the vehicle like shadows, their ethereal forms pulsating with a malevolent energy. Stay within the boundaries of the car. It is your only sanctuary, the hitchhiker cautioned, his eyes now reflecting a profound sadness. The phantoms outside wailed in frustration, their desperate cries reverberating through the haunted woods. With a final, mournful look, the hitchhiker gestured for the couple to continue their journey. The car's engine roared to life, and as they drove away from the spectral nightmare, the hitchhiker faded into the shadows, his silhouette lingering like a phantom in the rearview mirror. The couple sped off into the perpetual darkness. The memories of their encounter with the hitchhiker and the phantoms lingered, casting a pall over their once celebratory journey. The forgotten road twisted and turned, a never-ending labyrinth that seemed to defy the laws of time and space. Hope flickered within the couple as they believed they had eluded the grasp of the supernatural loop. The shadows that clung to their minds began to fade, replaced by a false sense of security. Unbeknownst to them, the haunting melody of the woods played on, orchestrating their fate with a sinister symphony. As the car navigated through the perpetual night, the dense forest opened up to a desolate clearing. Their headlights revealed a familiar sight. The hitchhiker, his spectral form waiting by the roadside. The couple's hearts sank, realizing that their journey had come full circle. The hitchhiker approached the car. You cannot escape the loop. The road demands its toll, and you are now part of the eternal cycle. Desperation clawed at the couple's hearts as they begged for release, but the hitchhiker's solemn gaze offered no solace. With a mournful nod, he gestured towards the clearing. As the couple stepped out of the car, the once familiar phantoms emerged from the shadows, their spectral forms mirrored by the couple's journey. Trapped in an unending cycle of torment, the couple, now transformed into tormented souls, joined the ghostly procession on the side of the road. As days, weeks, or maybe years passed, a new couple, out for a venture, traversed the lonely road. Trying to find their way, they look out of the window to see an anguished, spectral couple, hands outstretched, trying to flag the car down. The car's occupants had an overwhelming feeling of sadness as they saw fear and desperation on the phantoms' faces. As the phantom couple faded into the darkness, the forgotten road claimed yet another pair of lost souls, perpetuating the cycle of eternal torment. And so, the haunted woods whispered with the sorrowful echoes of countless stories, trapping wanderers in an unending dance of tragedy. The hitchhiker remained a silent witness to the eternal loop as the spectral procession continued, weaving the tales of lost souls into the fabric of the haunted realm. In today's tale from the shadows, a hard-working man must choose between financial gain or the loss of the love of his life. Which one would you choose? In a quaint village along the rusted east coast of England, there lived a carpenter, known for his unique craftsmanship. The shop he owned, nestled among a row of charming old buildings, was a testament to his life's dedication. The carpenter, with his hands roughened by years of work, was a familiar and respected figure in the community. His creations, ranging from intricate furniture to bespoke wooden trinkets, spoke of a talent honed through decades. However, the past 5 years had brought a relentless downturn in business. The world was changing, and with it, the needs and desires of the people. The once steady stream of customers, eager to own a piece of his artistry, had now trickled to a sparse few. The carpenter, a proud man, found himself in unfamiliar territory, not with wood and tools, but with the harsh reality of economic hardship. His small workshop, once a hub of ceaseless activity, echoed with the somber silence of diminishing hope. Each day, he would open the doors to his shop, arranging his works in the window, a silent plea to passers-by. Yet, as the days turned to weeks, and weeks to months, the carpenter's heart grew heavier, weighed down by a burden he could no longer bear alone. The morning air was brisk as he stepped out to retrieve the post. Among the usual bills and flyers, a stark white envelope caught his attention. The return address was all too familiar, the landlord. With a sense of foreboding, he tore open the envelope. The words within were a cold, unyielding hammer to his already fragile situation. Rent, due today, £3,000. The letter demanded. It was a sum he knew he could not muster, not with the way things were. More daunting than the immediate demand was the ultimatum that followed. Payment within 30 days, or face eviction. The words blurred before his eyes, each letter a reminder of his failing enterprise. Desperation clawed at his heart as he pondered the future, a future that seemed to grow dimmer with each passing moment. He walked back into the house, the letter hanging limply in his hand. His wife, sensing the gravity of the moment, met his gaze with a worried look. Together, they sat at the modest kitchen table, the letter laid out before them. Their conversation was a mix of hushed tones and heavy sighs, a dance around the harsh reality that loomed over them. The carpenter's hands, so skilled in shaping wood, now trembled slightly as he recounted their dwindling savings. His wife, a pillar of strength in their small family, tried to muster words of comfort, but the truth was stark and undeniable. No one seemed to need his unique carpentry service anymore. The world had moved on, leaving him and his cherished craft behind. As they sat in silence, the weight of their situation hung in the air. A tangible presence in the humble kitchen, the carpenter and his wife, bound by years of love and shared struggles, faced an uncertain future, their fate teetering precariously on the edge of a precipice from which there seemed no return. In the heart of his workshop, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and aged wood, Joseph sorted through his belongings with a heavy heart. Each tool and piece of lumber, a reminder of better times, now seemed like relics of a bygone era. He was in search of anything that might be sold to ease their financial burden, even if it meant parting with pieces of his cherished craft. The gentle tinkle of the shop's door chime broke the somber silence, heralding the arrival of a customer. Joseph looked up, his eyes meeting those of a man who seemed out of place amidst the rustic charm of the carpentry shop. The man was dressed in a pristine suit, exuding an aura of sophistication and wealth. His manner was polite yet assertive, a stark contrast to the humble setting he had stepped into. "Good morning. I am in search of someone to craft something quite special for me," the man said, his voice smooth and confident. Joseph straightened up, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "Yes, sir. I've been a carpenter my whole life. I'm sure I can assist you," he replied, eager to seize this unexpected opportunity. "Excellent. I need you to construct a box for me," the man stated, his eyes scanning the workshop as he spoke. He then produced a set of papers from a sleek briefcase. The papers were adorned with detailed sketches and diagrams, unlike anything Joseph had seen before. They depicted a box, but it was the markings on these drawings that truly caught Joseph's attention. Strange symbols, intricate and mysterious. These symbols must be carved into the wood, precisely as they are shown, exactly. The man emphasized, his tone leaving no room for error. Joseph studied the diagrams closely. "Yes, sir, the designs are intricate, but I am confident I can replicate them," he assured, though a sense of unease began to stir within him. "Excellent. If you complete the task within a week, I will pay you £10,000, the man declared, a sum that made Joseph's heart skip a beat. A week is a tight deadline, but I will dedicate myself to this task day and night, Joseph responded, a mixture of excitement and apprehension in his voice. I will return this time next week. Here is £1,000 for materials. The rest will be paid upon completion, the man said, placing a stack of bills on the counter. With a nod, he turned and left the shop as swiftly as he entered. Now we're going to have a short scare break while you ease your nerves. So while you're waiting, don't forget, if you're enjoying the content, go ahead and stab that subscribe button right now. As doing so, you'll really help the professor spread his shadow of evil. Now, let's get back to the story. In the whirlwind of the encounter, Joseph realized he hadn't even asked the man's name, but with no time to ponder this oversight, he immediately set to work. The challenge was daunting, yet the reward promised a solution to his dire financial straits. As Joseph began his task, the mysterious symbols seemed to dance before his eyes, each curve and line a puzzle to be solved. He worked with a fever born of desperation, the ticking clock, a constant reminder of the strange man's return. The clock's hands crept past midnight, the stillness of the night enveloping the carpentry shop. Joseph's eyes, heavy from the exhaustion, he struggled against the relentless tide of sleep. His hands, however, moved with an unwavering determination, meticulously carving the intricate symbols into the wood of the mysterious box. The task was arduous, demanding every ounce of his concentration and skill. In the small hours of the morning, as a clock struck 2 a.m., the creak of the door broke the silence. Victoria, Joseph's wife, stepped in. Her expression, a mix of worry and relief. The warm glow of the workshop lights cast a comforting embrace around her. "You're still here? I was worried when you didn't come home," she said, her voice tinged with concern. Joseph looked up, momentarily pulled from his deep focus. "Victoria, you won't believe it, a job, £10,000, but I've got to finish it within 7 days," he replied, his voice a blend of excitement and fatigue. He offered her a tired smile, a silent acknowledgement of her support, before turning his attention back to the task at hand. Victoria watched him for a moment, her eyes reflecting pride and a hint of apprehension about the strange commission. She left the room briefly, only to return a few minutes later with a large pack of food and a steaming flask of hot coffee. The aroma of the coffee mingled with the earthly scent of wood, a small comfort in the late hours. "This should keep your strength up," Victoria said, placing the food and coffee near him. Her presence, always a source of warmth and reassurance, was a reminder of the life they had built together, a life now hanging in the balance, hinging on the completion of this unusual project. Joseph gratefully accepted the sustenance. The food and the coffee provided a much-needed boost to his waning energy. As he ate, he shared with Victoria the details of the strange man's visit and the peculiarities of the box. Together, they pondered the mystery of the symbols and the urgency behind the man's request. Despite the questions swirling in their minds, the immediacy of their financial woes anchored their focus. The promise of the hefty payment was a beacon of hope in their stormy sea of troubles. With renewed vigor, Joseph returned to his work, the chisel moving with precision under his skilled hands. Victoria, ever his pillar of strength, settled in a chair nearby, her presence a silent vigil as the night deepened. As dawn began to paint the sky with its early hues, Joseph stood back to admire his work. The box, now nearly complete, was an imposing structure, standing exactly 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide. It resembled a large coffin, but it was the elaborate carvings that set it apart, an intricate tapestry of mysterious symbols and designs, each meticulously etched into the wood. Exhausted, yet satisfied, Joseph wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes tracing over each detail. He had followed the strange man's instructions to the letter, ensuring that every symbol was replicated with precision. The purpose of the box, however, remained a mystery. one that tugged at his curiosity even in his fatigued state. Deciding to take a brief respite, Joseph stepped into the adjoining room for a moment of rest. Unbeknownst to him, a stray cat, a frequent visitor to the shop in search of warmth and scraps, had slipped inside. The cat, curious and unassuming, found the box an intriguing new addition to its familiar haunt. With a graceful leap, the cat landed inside the box, its movements silent and agile. But then, an awful, piercing scream shattered the quiet of the workshop. Joseph, startled by the unexpected sound, rushed back into the workroom, his heart pounding. To his bewilderment, the room was as he left it, the box standing solemn and undisturbed, no sign of a cat, no indication of what could have caused such a distressing noise. Must be imagining it. I'm getting tired, he muttered to himself, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling. Not long now, Joseph, he whispered, trying to refocus on the task at hand. Yet, the eerie scream lingered in his mind, adding an unnerving air to the already mysterious project. With a deep breath, he returned to his work, the chisel once again dancing in his skilled hands. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the workshop. The box, with its enigmatic symbols, seemed to absorb the light, its presence growing more ominous with each passing hour. Joseph, driven by a mix of fear and determination, worked on, unaware of the true nature of what he was creating and the unseen forces that might be at play. On the sixth day, under the fading light of the afternoon, Joseph's hands finally came to a rest. Finished, he exhaled, a long sigh of relief escaping his lips. The box stood before him, a testament of his skill and perseverance. Every inch of its surface, both inside and out, was adorned with the intricate carvings, the mysterious symbols etched deep into the wood. He called out to his wife, Victoria. "It's done," he announced, a mix of pride and exhaustion in his voice. "I have no idea what it is, but it's done." "I'll bring you some hot coffee," Victoria replied, her voice echoing with warmth and support. She arrived shortly, a hot flask in hand, and took a moment to inspect the finished work. The box, with its otherworldly carvings, seemed to emanate an uncanny presence. "It's sort of spooky. These carvings look like old symbols from a witch movie," she commented, her eyes scanning the detailed work. "I'm so proud of you, Joseph. You always come through for us," she said, smiling at him. Their embrace was a brief respite from the strangeness of the box. The couple began to laugh and joke about the box, trying to lighten the mood. "It's probably a box to keep Frankenstein in," Victoria jested. "More like Dracula," Joseph replied, joining in the playful banter. "Let me see if I fit inside," Victoria said jokingly, sliding into the box. As she did, the symbols on the box's surface began to glow with an eerie light. Her expression shifted from joy to sheer terror in an instant. Then, before Joseph's disbelieving eyes, Victoria vanished. Joseph stared at the box in horror, his mind struggling to comprehend what had just happened. "Victoria?" he called out, his voice tinged with panic. As he was about to climb into the box himself, a voice from behind him stopped him cold. "I wouldn't go in there if I were you." Joseph turned sharply to find the man who had commissioned the box standing there, his expression unreadable. "What the hell's going on? My wife just vanished in that damn box," Joseph demanded, his voice a mix of fear and anger. The man's presence, once a symbol of hope for financial salvation, now took a sinister air. The box, with its glowing symbols and inexplicable power, stood between them, a dark mystery that had just consumed the most important person in Joseph's life. Joseph's hands, once steady and sure, trembled with a mixture of rage and fear. He awaited an explanation, his heart racing as the man who had brought this nightmare into his life prepared to reveal the truth behind the enigmatic and now terrifying creation. Joseph's heart raced with panic and anger as he faced the man, his voice a desperate scream. "Get her back!" he demanded, his eyes burning with a mix of fear and fury. "It's too late," the man replied calmly, his demeanor unsettlingly serene in the face of the chaos he had wrought. "This is a one-way dimension box. It takes whoever enters to the realm of the dead." Joseph's resolve hardened. "Then I'll go get my wife," he declared, his voice resolute despite the terror gripping his heart. "If you wish," the strange man said with a cold detachment. "I guess it would save me payment." Joseph's gaze bore into the man. "Can you get her back?" he asked, clinging to a slither of hope. "No. Those who enter the box are forever damned to walk with the dead, and unlike the movies, there's no coming back," the man replied, his words like a death knell. "This is all you're doing. Who are you?" Joseph demanded, his body tense for a confrontation he knew he would not understand, let alone win. The strange man held Joseph's gaze, a chilling smile creeping across his face. "Have you not guessed that yet?" he asked. As he spoke, the air in the room turned ice cold, a darkness seeping into every corner, snuffing out the light. The man's face began to transform, his features melting away to reveal something much more sinister. His skin stretched, growing thinner and thinner until his face was nothing more than a skull, a visage of death itself. Joseph recalled in horror, the realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. The man before him was no ordinary customer. He was a harbinger of the supernatural, a being from a realm beyond human comprehension. The workshop, once a place of creation and life, had become a gateway to the unknown, a crossroad between the living and the dead. The box, Joseph's masterpiece, was now a vessel of unspeakable power, a trap that had ensnared his beloved Victoria. Joseph stood frozen, the chilling gaze of death upon him, as he faced the true nature of the man and the terrifying reality of what he had unwittingly unleashed. The fate of his wife, his own fate, hung in the balance, teetering on the edge of an abyss from which there seemed no escape. The man, now a skeletal figure embodying death itself, stood ominously beside the box. He opened it wide, revealing to Joseph a vista that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. As Joseph peered into the box, he saw a vast, bleak landscape stretching before him, a realm of the dead. It was a world filled with the souls of those who had passed, their cries echoing in a chorus of despair, pleading for release, for mercy. "What will it be, Joseph?" the skeletal figure asked, its voice a hollow echo. "Will you enter, or would you like your payment?" Joseph's eyes were drawn once more to the box. The decision before him was unimaginable. Step into the unknown in a desperate bid to find his wife, or remain in the living world, haunted by her loss and the role he played in it. The box was not just a portal, it was a test of his love, his courage, and his very soul. Outside the workshop, the world remained oblivious to the supernatural drama unfolding within. The shop, shrouded in darkness, gave no hint of the extraordinary events taking place behind its closed doors. Inside, Joseph stood at the precipice of the unknown, his heart torn between hope and despair. His mind raced with questions. Could he find Victoria in the ghastly realm? Was it even possible to bring her back? Or was this a journey from which there was no return? As these thoughts swirled in his mind, the skeletal figure watched, its empty eye sockets seemingly piercing into Joseph's very being. The choice was his alone to make, the choice between the tangible world he knew and the spectral abyss that lay before him. Unnoticed, the skeletal hand of the figure reached out, its bony fingers deftly turning the sign of the shop door. The words "open" flipped to "closed," a symbolic gesture sealing the fate of the shop of Joseph. and of the path he was about to choose. Discover the chilling tale of a man who buys a fragment of an ancient torture rack at an auction, only to be haunted by the spirit of its former torturer. Listen to how he's compelled to reconstruct the gruesome device while the ghost plots to seize control of his body. Don't miss this spine-tingling journey into terror. The rain drizzled outside, casting a sombre mood over the small, dimly lit auction house. Nestled among the array of peculiar antiques and forgotten relics, Jonathan Harker stood silently, his gaze fixated on a peculiar item on display. It was a fragment of an old torture rack, its dark wood and rusted iron exuding an eerie aura. Jonathan, a history enthusiast with a penchant for the macabre, was drawn to it like a moth to a flame. He had heard tales of the rack's origin, used in medieval times by a notorious torturer known for his cruel and innovative methods. Such dark history only fueled Jonathan's fascination. As the auctioneer called for bids, Jonathan's hand shot up almost involuntarily. The room was thick with an uncomfortable silence, the other bidders seemingly hesitant or perhaps wisely disinterested in the grim artifact. The price was surprisingly low, and within moments the piece was his. Feeling a mixture of triumph and an inexplicable sense of dread, Jonathan approached to claim his prize. As his fingers brushed against the cold, rough surface of the rack, a shiver ran down his spine. It was as if the wood whispered secrets of a bygone era, echoes and screams etched into its grain. The auctioneer, an elderly man with knowing eyes, handed the piece of wood over to Jonathan. "Be wary, young man," he said, his voice tinged with a seriousness that seemed out of place. "Some items carry more than just history. They bear the weight of souls long gone." Jonathan chuckled nervously, dismissing the old man's words as mere superstition. He carried the rack fragment to his car, the rain now pouring in earnest, as if the heavens themselves wept for the artifact's release. Back at his home, Jonathan placed the piece in his study, a room filled with other historical artifacts and books. That night, as he lay in bed, the house seemed unusually quiet, the silence almost oppressive. It was then that he heard it for the first time, a faint whisper, barely audible, like the hiss of a distant wind. He dismissed it as a figment of his imagination, a side effect of the day's excitement. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They called out in a language he couldn't understand, yet the message was clear. He needed to complete the rack. Desire to do so became an obsession, consuming his thoughts and darkening his soul. Unbeknownst to Jonathan, the fragment was not just a relic of the past. It was a key, a gateway for something ancient and malevolent. The ghost of the rack's creator, a torturer from centuries past, had found in him a willing descendant, a vessel to continue a legacy of cruelty long thought to be buried in the annals of history. As Jonathan hunted for the missing pieces of the rack, he failed to notice the changes within himself, the growing darkness in his eyes, the cruel twist in his mouth, the harshness in his voice. The once kind and curious historian was slowly being eroded away, replaced by something far more sinister. The morning sun filtered weakly through the curtains of Jonathan's study, casting long shadows over the ancient fragment of the torture rack that now seemed to dominate the room. Jonathan sat at his desk, his eyes not on the numerous books or the papers strewn about, but fixed intently on a dark piece of wood and iron. Since acquiring it, his nights had been restless, filled with unsettling dreams of shadowy figures and echoing screams. As the days passed, the pull towards the rack grew stronger, an invisible force beckoning him to complete what was once started centuries ago. He found himself scouring antique shops and online auctions, obsessively searching for the remaining parts of the rack. The pursuit consumed him, each waking moment dedicated to this singular, dark purpose. But it wasn't just the rack that was changing. Jonathan himself was undergoing a transformation. His friends and colleagues began to notice a shift in his demeanor. Once a warm and engaging man, he now seemed distant, his once sparkling eyes now dull, and often veering towards a cold glare. Conversations with him became strained, his responses short and sometimes laced with a biting sarcasm that bordered on cruelty. One evening, while having dinner with a close friend, Peter, the change became disturbingly evident. Peter, concerned, had brought up Jonathan's recent obsession. "Jonathan, you're not yourself lately. This fixation with the rack, it's not healthy," he said, his voice laced with worry. Jonathan's response was a cold laugh, a sound that seemed foreign even to his own ears. "Healthy, Peter? You, of all people, should appreciate the historical significance of my find. I'm restoring a piece of history," he replied, his tone dismissive and harsh. Peter, taken aback by the response, tried to reason with him, but Jonathan was unyielding. The conversation quickly escalated, with Jonathan's words turning sharp and cruel, cutting Peter deeply. The evening ended with Peter leaving in dismay, and Jonathan feeling a surge of inexplicable satisfaction from the verbal sparring. Alone in his study later that night, Jonathan sat staring at the rack fragment. The whispers were clearer now, more demanding. They spoke of power, of legacy, of the need to complete the rack. And for the first time, Jonathan felt a sinister pleasure in the thought of it. The idea of wielding such power, the power to inflict pain and command fear, was intoxicating. He delved deeper into his quest to rebuild the rack. Jonathan's interactions with others grew increasingly unsettling. His patience was thin, his temper quick to flare. People began to avoid him, sensing something dark and dangerous brewing beneath the surface. And then, one fateful day, Jonathan found another piece of the rack. The moment he touched it, a jolt of energy coursed through him, and the whispers crescendoed into an overpowering chorus. His vision momentarily blurred, and when it cleared, he saw not his study, but a dark, damp dungeon from another time, with the rack fully assembled, waiting for its next victim. Shaking off the vision, Jonathan realized with a mix of horror and exhilaration that he was no longer in control. The legacy of the torturer was slowly claiming him, reshaping him into an instrument of its will. The line between man and monster was blurring, and the journey towards an inevitable dark destiny was well underway. Jonathan's world had narrowed down to a singular, all-consuming obsession: the reconstruction of the medieval torture rack. Each day, he could feel the ancient spirit of the torturer weaving its dark tendrils tighter around his soul, driving him further from the man he once was. One chilling evening, Jonathan's girlfriend, Emily, visited his home. She had been worried about him. His recent behavior and withdrawal from their relationship had left her both concerned and confused. Emily, with her bright smile and gentle demeanor, represented normalcy that Jonathan was rapidly losing touch with. As they sat together in the living room, attempting to rekindle some semblance of their old, playful and dynamic relationship, Something sinister simmered beneath Jonathan's forced smiles. They began to play a mock wrestling game, a common playful act between them. However, this time, as Jonathan pinned Emily down, something within him snapped. "Confess!" he bellowed, his voice unrecognizable, laced with a malice that froze Emily's blood. His hands gripped her arms and legs, pulling them apart with a frightening intensity. Emily, caught completely off guard, struggled beneath his grasp, terror overtaking her. "Jonathan, stop! You're hurting me!" she cried out in panic. The sound of her voice seemed to momentarily break the spell. Releasing her, Jonathan stumbled back, horror-stricken at what he had almost done. Emily, without a word, scrambled to her feet and fled from the house, her departure marking the end of something beautiful that had been irrevocably tarnished by the growing darkness within him. In the days that followed, Jonathan's isolation deepened. His search for the remaining pieces of the rack turned futile, as if the universe itself was denying him the completion of his cursed quest. Desperation clawed at him. He made a decision that would seal his fate. He sought out a local carpenter, a craftsman known for his skill in working with antique restorations. Feigning a scholarly interest in medieval history, Jonathan commissioned him to construct the missing parts of the rack, providing detailed sketches that he had drawn from his visions and the whispers that now rarely ceased. The carpenter, oblivious to the true nature of the project, agreed the task. As he worked, Jonathan watched, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. With each piece that took shape, the grip of the ancient torturous spirit tightened, his whispers growing more commanding, filling Jonathan's mind with visions of power and cruelty. When the rack was finally completed, standing ominous and foreboding in Jonathan's study, a chilling sense of accomplishment washed over him. He ran his hands over the cold, smooth surfaces, feeling a connection to the past, soaked in pain and terror. The line between him and the ghostly torturer had all but vanished. Jonathan, once a man of learning and kindness, had been consumed by the legacy of his ancestor. The rack, now whole, stood as a monument to his descent into darkness, a tool waiting to be used in the continuation of centuries-old cruelty and torment. The journey into the abyss was complete, and there was no turning back. In the heart of his foreboding study, surrounded by the shadows of the night, Jonathan stood before the fully assembled torture rack. Its presence filled the room with an ominous air, a silent testament to the darkness that had consumed his soul. The whispers of an ancient torturer were now incessant, urging him to complete the final, ghastly act that would fully bind him to his cursed heritage. Jonathan's mind, once a sanctuary of knowledge and compassion, was now a battleground of sanity and madness. The part of him that still clung to his humanity recoiled at the thought of what he was being compelled to do. Yet the darker part, the part that had grown in the shadow of the rack, craved to experience his power. Driven by this twisted desire, Jonathan devised a malevolent plan. He decided to lure someone into his home under the pretense of needing help with a historical research project. It was a simple, yet deceitful ruse, one that preyed on the kindness of others, a trait he himself had once possessed. After careful consideration, he chose his victim, a young graduate student from the local university, known for her keen interest in medieval history. Jonathan reached out to her, his invitation laced with the promise of exclusive access to his collection of historical artifacts. The student, eager for the opportunity, agreed without hesitation. The night she arrived, Jonathan led her to his study. his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and dread. As she marveled at the collection, he offered her a drink, one he had laced with a sedative. Within minutes, she slumped to the floor unconscious. With a chilling resolve, Jonathan placed her upon the rack. As he began to turn the wheel, the student regained consciousness, her eyes wide with terror. Her screams echoed through the room, a haunting melody to the symphony of whispers in Jonathan's head. But as he watched her body contort in agony, something within him snapped. The last vestiges of his humanity surged forth, horror and revulsion overwhelming the dark ecstasy he had felt moments before. He released the wheel, collapsing to his knees, his hands trembling. The room spun around, the walls seemingly closing in. The whispers turned into thunderous roars, condemning him for his weakness, for his failure to fully embrace his destiny. In his weakened state, both physically and mentally, the spirit of the torturer saw its opportunity. It began to seep into Jonathan's soul, filling every crevice of his being with its malevolent essence. Jonathan felt himself slipping away, his consciousness fading into the background as the torturer's spirit took hold. The young student, seizing the moment, managed to free herself and escape, her departure unnoticed by Jonathan, who was now lost in the depths of his own mind. As the torturer's spirit melded with his, Jonathan's body stood up, but it was no longer Jonathan who looked out from the once kind eyes. The spirit of the ancient torturer had found its vessel, ready to walk the earth once more, to continue a legacy of horror that had been momentarily thwarted by time. The study, once a place of scholarly pursuit, had transformed into a chamber of horrors. The spirit of the ancient torturer, now inhabiting Jonathan's body, reveled in its newfound freedom. The whispers that had once tormented Jonathan were now commands that the torturer heeded with dark delight. The need for victims was pressing, a cruel necessity to cement his hold over Jonathan's body. The spirit understood that it needed to subject someone to the brink of death on the rack to complete the sinister ritual, to bind itself permanently to the mortal realm. Under the guise of Jonathan, the torturer plotted to ensnare another unsuspecting soul. He chose his next victim with care, a solitary individual, unlikely to be immediately missed. Using the same ruse of historical research, he invited a local antiquarian to his home, a man known for his reclusive nature and deep interest in medieval artifacts. The antiquarian, enticed by the prospect of examining Jonathan's collection, arrived one fog-laden evening. He was greeted by a host who seemed a shadow of the man he had expected to meet, his demeanor cold and his eyes devoid of any warmth. Once in the study, the antiquarian's fascination with the artifacts turned to dread as he realized the true nature of his visit. Before he could react, he was overpowered and bound to the rack. The torturer, inhabiting Jonathan's body, began his gruesome work. He turned the rack slowly, savoring each moment of his victim's agony. The screams of the antiquarian echoed through the room, a macabre symphony to which the torturer conducted with sadistic pleasure. Hours passed, the torture unrelenting in his cruelty. The antiquarian, pushed to the very brink of death, lay broken and barely conscious. The spirit inside Jonathan relished the pain he inflicted, drawing strength from the suffering he caused. As the dawn's first light crept into the room, the deed was done. The torturer, feeling the final bonds securing him to Jonathan's body, stood triumphant. Jonathan's body was now his vessel, permanently bound to the torturer's malevolent spirit. The antiquarian, left in a state between life and death, was a testament to the completion of the ritual. The torturer, in his new mortal form, revelled in the knowledge that he could now walk the earth, continuing his legacy of terror. The study, with the rack at its centre, had become a shrine to unspeakable acts. The spirit of the torturer, once confined to the whispers of the past, was now free, its hunger for suffering and pain unquenchable. The morning light had barely touched the earth when the sound of forceful banging shattered the eerie silence of Jonathan's home. The police had arrived, alerted by the young student who had narrowly escaped the horrors of the study. Their urgent knocks echoed through the halls, a stark contrast to the sinister calm within. The torturer, now fully inhabiting Jonathan's body, felt no fear or concern. With a chilling smile, he glided towards the door, his movement imbued with a dark grace. The spirit within him was reveling in its newfound power, eager to confront any who dared to challenge its reign. As he opened the door, 2 burly police officers burst in, their faces set in expressions of determination and shock. Their eyes quickly found the antiquarian still bound to the rack, his body a testament to the unspeakable cruelty inflicted upon him. Without hesitation, the officers moved to apprehend the torturer. But to their disbelief, he merely laughed, a sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of hell itself. With an ease that defied belief, he brushed them aside as if they were small children, his strength amplified by the malevolent spirit that controlled him. The officers, stunned by the display of power, attempted to regroup and tackle him. They were no match for the supernatural force they faced. With swift, brutal efficiency, the torturer struck them down, rendering them unconscious with ease. His laughter filled the room as he dragged one of the officers to the rack. With a twisted sense of excitement, he began to turn the wheel, relishing the sound of bones breaking and flesh tearing. The rack, pushed beyond its limits, groaned under the strain of its sadistic delight. As the torturer stood back, admiring his handiwork, a transformation began to take place. Jonathan's features, once kind and gentle, morphed into a visage of pure evil. The face of the ancient torturer emerged, his cruel eyes gleaming with a malevolent joy. This physical change was the final seal, the complete fusion of the spirit with Jonathan's body. With the transformation complete, the torturer walked out of the house, stepping into the light of a new day. His appearance was now that of the medieval torturer, a figure from a nightmare made flesh. As he walked, his laughter echoed through the streets, a chilling herald of the terror that had been unleashed upon the world. The house, once a haven of scholarly pursuit, now stood as a silent witness to the birth of a new era of darkness. The police, and soon the world, would come to realize the full extent of the horror that had taken place within its walls. But for now, the torturer walked free, his power absolute, his hunger for suffering and pain boundless. The city was in turmoil, following the gruesome discoveries at Jonathan's home. The police, amidst a flurry of investigation and public outcry, found themselves at a dead end. Jonathan, the man they sought, had vanished without a trace. The transformation that had taken place within him had rendered him unrecognizable, his features altered by the malevolent spirit that had now controlled him. Meanwhile, the torturer, wearing the guise of a new face, moved through the city's underbelly unnoticed. He was a shadow, weaving his way through society, his true nature concealed behind a mask of normalcy. With each passing day, his influence grew, reaching into the corners of power and corruption. As he ascended the ranks of the clandestine networks that thrived in the dark, his presence became known among those who wielded power from the shadows. His cruelty and strength, his ability to instill fear and obedience, quickly earned him a place among them. One evening, in a dimly lit room where the city's most influential and corrupt gathered, the torturer took his place at the head of the table, his eyes cold and calculating, swept over the faces of those who sat before him. They were people of influence, politicians, business tycoons, criminal overlords, each a cog in the machine of power and control. The room fell in silence as he stood to speak, his voice carrying an undeniable authority. "We sit in high places," he began, his tone dark and commanding. "In the shadows of power, we pull the strings of this city. We shape its destiny." He paused, his gaze piercing each person in the room. "We are legion," he continued, a sinister smile playing on his lips. "Our reach is far, our grasp unyielding. Together, we shall steer the course of this world into a new era." The people in the room nodded, a mixture of fear and respect evident in their eyes. They understood the power they were witnessing, a force unlike any they had encountered before. In the mists sat not just a man, but a manifestation of an ancient cruelty and darkness, now reborn in the modern world. Outside, the city continued its nightly bustle, oblivious to the fact that a new shadow had fallen over it. In the halls of power, the torturer sat, his influence spreading like a dark web. His reign had begun, a reign that promised to be as long and as cruel as that of the spirit that now inhabited him. And so, the world unknowingly turned under the watchful gaze of a tormentor from the past, a being whose thirst for power and suffering knew no bounds. The legacy of the torturer, once confined to the annals of history, was now etched into the present, a dark echo resonating through the corridors of power. The family trip that was supposed to bring a smile to everybody's face turned those smiles into something far more sinister. I do hope that today's story will put a smile on your face. The sun was setting over the picturesque suburb of Maplewood as the Miller family car, laden with suitcases and memories, pulled into the driveway of the cozy two-story house. It had been a week since the Millers had ventured off on their spontaneous vacation to an old, almost forgotten town nestled deep in the mountains. The town, with its cobblestone streets and ancient architecture, was like a step back in time, a perfect escape from the bustling modern life of Maplewood. Mark and Linda Miller, sitting in the front seats, shared a glance of contentment, their smiles almost too perfect in the fading light. In the back seat, Emily, 12, with her nose buried in a book, and her younger brother Josh, 10, playing a game on his tablet, seemed oblivious to the subtle changes in their parents. The house welcomed them back with a familiar creak and groan as Mark and Linda began unloading the car. With mechanical efficiency, the children rushed inside, eager to return to the comfort of their rooms. Emily's room was a sanctuary of books and drawings, a stark contrast to Josh's world of action figures and space posters. Dinner that night was a quiet affair. Mark and Linda chatted about mundane things, their voices carrying a strange, melodic tone that Emily couldn't quite place. Josh, usually chatty, was unusually silent, his eyes darting between his parents. Later, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about the trip. There had been something off about that town. The locals, with their stiff postures and vacant smiles, had unnerved her. She remembered a chill ran down her spine as she passed an old photograph in the town's inn, the faces smiling in a way that seemed almost predatory. As sleep began to claim her, she heard her parents moving around downstairs. Their footsteps were too synchronized, the sound too crisp, A faint whisper of unease settled in her heart. It was probably nothing, she told herself, just the remnants of a long drive and an overactive imagination. But deep down, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed them home from the strange town. Something that was now living under their roof, wearing the faces of her parents. In the dead of night, the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, the shadows stretching and twisted in a pale moonlight. Emily drifted into a restless sleep, unaware of the two figures standing motionless in the hallway outside her door, their smiles never wavering, their eyes empty of warmth. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the Miller household. The normalcy of the morning routine was comforting, yet Emily couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that had taken root in her mind. As she descended the stairs for breakfast, she noticed her mother, Linda, meticulously aligning each utensil on the table, a level of precision that was uncharacteristic of her usually relaxed demeanour. "Good morning, Emily," Linda said, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Could you please bring down the family photo album from the attic? Your father and I would like to reminisce about our trip." The request seemed harmless, but it struck Emily as odd. They rarely looked at old albums, and her parents' newfound interest in family memories felt out of place. Nevertheless, she agreed, curious to see if her unease had any merit. Josh, still quiet, picked at his breakfast, casting wary glances at their parents. Mark was reading the newspaper, but his movements were stiff, his laughter at a comic strip sounding forced and hollow. After breakfast, Emily climbed to the attic, a place of dust-covered memories and long-forgotten treasures. She found the album buried under a pile of old blankets. As she flipped through it, a sense of nostalgia washed over her, but then her fingers paused on a page. There, amidst the family photos, was a picture from their recent trip. Her parents stood in front of an old ancient oak tree, their smiles too wide, too unnatural. Descending the stairs, album in hand, Emily's thoughts were interrupted by her father's voice. "Emily, Josh, we've decided to renovate the house. We need you both to sort through your things. Anything old or unnecessary should be discarded. Now we're going to have a short scare break while you ease your nerves. So while you're waiting, don't forget, if you're enjoying the content, go ahead and stab that subscribe button right now. As doing so, you'll really help the professor spread his shadow of evil. Now, let's get back to the story." Renovate? Since when had they planned this? Their house, with its cozy charm and lived-in feel, had never needed a makeover. The request felt as bizarre as her mother's earlier that morning. Throughout the day, Emily and Josh found themselves complying with a series of peculiar demands. Linda asked Emily to part with a cherished collection of childhood storybooks, claiming they needed to make space for the new. Mark instructed Josh to throw away his beloved action figures, stating they were clutter. As the sun began to set, Emily and Josh met in the safety of their room. They spoke in hushed tones, sharing their growing suspicions. Their parents' behavior was not just odd, it was unsettling, methodical, as if they were following a script. "Did you notice their smiles?" Emily whispered. "They never change even when they're upset." Josh nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "And they keep talking about making everything new, as if they want to erase our past." Determined to understand the truth, Emily suggested they search the attic for more clues. Maybe there was something in those old photographs, something they had missed, that could explain the bizarre transformation of their parents. As night enveloped the house, the two children crept back to the attic, unaware of the two pairs of eyes that followed their every move, the smiles never faltering, the intentions hidden behind a facade of normality. The attic was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Emily and Josh rummaged through boxes and old furniture, seeking any clue that might explain their parents' strange behaviour. The air was thick with the musty scent of forgotten years. As they sifted through a box of old newspapers and documents, a creak from the stairway startled them. Their hearts raced as the steps grew closer. The sound, methodical and precise, Emily quickly hid behind an old wardrobe, pulling Josh with her. Peeking through a crack, they saw their parents enter the attic. Mark and Linda looked around, their expressions unchanged. "The children are curious," Mark said in a flat tone. "We must be careful." "They will adopt to the changes," Linda replied, her voice equally devoid of emotion. The siblings exchanged terrified glances. Their parents' conversation was cryptic, but it was clear they were aware of Emily and Josh's suspicions. After a few moments of searching, Mark and Linda left the attic, their steps retreating down the stairs. Once they were sure their parents were gone, Emily and Josh emerged from their hiding spot. "We need to find out what's going on," Emily whispered. "Something's really wrong here." Later that day, Emily noticed her parents talking to the neighbours across the street. The Johnsons were a friendly couple who had always been kind to the Miller children. But today, something was off. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson wore the same eerie, unchanging smiles as Mark and Linda. Their movements were stiff, their laughter forced. Emily tugged at Josh's sleeve, pointing out the window. "Look, Josh, the Johnsons! They're acting like Mum and Dad." Josh's eyes widened as they watched the scene unfold. The four adults conversed in the Johnsons' front yard, their expressions unnaturally cheerful. "This is too weird," Josh said, a hint of fear in his voice. "First Mum and Dad, now the Johnsons." Emily bit her lip, deep in thought. Maybe it's not just our parents. Maybe whatever happened to them is spreading. The realization sent a shiver down their spines. The children knew they were facing something far beyond their understanding, something that threatened not just their family, but their entire neighborhood. As night fell, Emily and Josh huddled together in her room, discussing their next move. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. The thought of their parents, once warm and loving, now cold and distant, filled them with dread, and the Johnsons' transformation only added to the growing sense of urgency. "We need to find out what happened during that trip," Emily said, determination in her voice. "Whatever started this, it's connected to that place." Nodding in agreement, Josh added, "And we need to be careful. If Mum and Dad know we're onto them, there's no telling what they're going to do." As they devised a plan to uncover the truth, the house around them seemed to creak and groan more than usual, as if echoing their fears and uncertainties. The once familiar walls now felt like a prison, holding secrets too sinister to comprehend. Josh and Emily, hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination, crept towards the front door. They had agreed it was time to seek help outside their neighborhood, to find someone who could make sense of the bizarre transformations happening around them. As they slowly opened the door, a blood-curdling scream pierced the evening air. They froze, looking out to see Tony Johnson, the young boy from across the street, bolting out of his house. His face was twisted in terror as he shouted, "You're not my mother! Leave me alone!" Emily and Josh watched in horror as Mr. Johnson, with the same eerie, unchanging smile, calmly followed Tony. He said, in a soothing yet unsettling voice, "No!" Tony screamed, struggling as his father grabbed him. "You're not my father! Help me!" The siblings' eyes darted down the street, hoping to see a neighbor, anyone react to Tony's pleas. But what they saw chilled them to the bone. Every family on the street was standing on their doorsteps, watching the scene unfold. Each face bore the same unnerving smile, their eyes empty of genuine concern. Realizing the gravity of their situation, Emily and Josh quickly retreated inside. The neighborhood was no longer a safe haven. It had become a prison of smiling faces and hidden horrors. "We need to help Tony," Emily whispered urgently. "He seems to be the only one who's left." As the commotion outside quietened down, they made a daring plan to sneak out to Tony's house. The backyards provided some cover, allowing them to move unseen. Reaching Tony's house, they crouched in his back garden, hearts racing. Emily picked up a small stone and tossed it gently at Tony's window. The window opened, and Tony's face appeared, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Tony, we're going to get you out of here." "What?" Emily began, but Josh suddenly grabbed her arm, cutting her off. Tony's expression had changed. His face now mirrored the same eerie smile that had been seen on the adults. It was a chilling transformation, his youthful features contorted into an unsettling grin. "Let's get out of here," Josh said, pulling Emily away. They retreated quickly, the realization sinking in that Tony was no longer the ally they thought he was. Back in Emily's room, the siblings sat in stunned silence. The neighborhood was lost, each family succumbing to whatever sinister force had taken hold. Their own parents, the Johnsons, and now Tony. It was spreading, and they were running out of options. "We can't trust anyone," Josh said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Whatever this is, it's taking over everyone." Emily nodded, a mix of fear and resolve in her eyes. "We need to leave Maplewood, find help, find out what's causing this and how to stop it." As they began to plan their escape, the night outside grew darker, the smiles of the neighbors casting long, ominous shadows across the streets of what was once a peaceful suburb. The danger was closer than ever, and time was running out. The tension in Emily and Josh's room was palpable as they sat, huddled together, plotting their next move. The door suddenly swung open, revealing their parents standing in the doorway, their smiles unchanging, unnaturally wide. "It's time to come downstairs," they said in unison, their voices eerily calm. Emily and Josh exchanged a glance of sheer terror. They knew all too well what this invitation meant, a transformation into whatever their parents had become, a fate they were desperate to avoid. "Who are you and why are you doing this?" Emily demanded, her voice trembling. "We know you're not our parents," Josh added defiantly. Their parents simply looked at each other before turning back to the children. "Soon you will not care. You will have no worries and have a single purpose," they said. "Now come downstairs." Reluctantly, Emily and Josh stood up and followed them. As they reached the halfway point of the stairs, Josh whispered, "Now!" In a split second, they charged past their parents, bolting towards the front door. The door flung open and they sprinted down the street. To their horror, as they ran, every door on the street opened. The residents, all bearing the same creepy smile, began to chase after them. Screams and shouts filled the air as the neighbors pointed and yelled at the fleeing children. Looking back, Emily and Josh saw their parents, the Johnsons, and even Tony run in with the rest of the crowd. Their faces were twisted into a grotesque smile, their eyes devoid of any warmth. As they reached the end of the street, a group of smiling neighbors blocked their path. Without hesitating, Emily shouted, "Split up! You go left, I'll go right! Meet me at the park!" With that, they veered in opposite directions, narrowly evading the grasp of their once friendly neighbors. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they navigated the twisted maze of Maplewood streets, each turn a gamble between safety and capture. Josh darted down alleyways and jumped over fences, his mind racing with fear and determination. Emily, on the other hand, sprinted through backyards and side streets, her breath ragged, but her resolve unbroken. The once familiar neighborhood had turned into a nightmarish landscape, with every smiling face a reminder of a horror that had befallen the community. The siblings knew there was only one chance of survival: to regroup and find a way out of Maplewood, away from the sinister force that had transformed their world into a living nightmare. Josh's heart raced as he ran, evading capture with a mixture of luck and desperation. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit faded into the distance. He managed to escape, but his mind was consumed with worry for Emily. Meanwhile, Emily was not as fortunate. She had been grabbed by one of the neighbors, her screams echoing down the empty street as she was dragged back to her house. Inside, her captors tied her up on the couch, her struggles futile against their unnerving strength. "Why are you doing this?" she cried, tears streaming down her face. Her parents, or rather, the entities wearing their faces, ignored her question. "Where is Josh?" they demanded. "Tell me who you are and I'll tell you," Emily retorted, trying to mask her fear with defiance. In response, her parents placed an old, strange wooden box on the coffee table. It was intricately carved with symbols that seemed ancient and ominous. "This is the soul chest from our town," her mother said, her voice cold and emotionless. "Each soul in our town made an agreement many years ago. We would sacrifice ourselves to avoid persecution for witchcraft. In return, we were given new bodies to possess. You will now sacrifice your vessel to one of us." Emily's eyes widened in horror as the truth dawned on her. The residents of that small, forgotten town had made a dark pact long ago. To escape the witch hunts and persecution, they had turned to a forbidden ritual, offering their souls in exchange for immortal life in new bodies. Now the curse had caught up with them, seeking new vessels to continue its sinister cycle. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the magnitude of the situation. The entire neighborhood had been ensnared by this ancient curse, and now they wanted her and Josh to be their next hosts. "Please," she pleaded. "You can't do this, we're just kids." But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The smile of her parents' faces never wavered as they prepared to open the soul chest. Emily knew she had to warn Josh, to save him from the same fate. But bound and helpless, she could only hope that her brother would find a way to save them both from the relentless grip of the centuries-old curse. Emily's mind raced as she saw her parents move to open the chest. In a desperate bid for time, she blurted out, "Wait, I'll take you to Josh. At least let us change together." It was a gamble, but she needed a moment to think, to plan. Her parents paused, considering her offer. Their sole focus was to find Josh and complete the ritual. Nodding in agreement, they began to lead her towards the front door. As they neared the table, holding the soul chest, Emily acted. With a swift, determined kick, she sent the table and the chest tumbling to the floor. The chest hit the ground with a thud, its lid flying open. A greenish spectral light burst forth, enveloping the room. Her parents, caught in the light, collapsed, convulsing violently. Seizing the moment, Emily dashed out of the door, leaving the chaos behind her. As she ran down the street, flickering lights emanated from each house, signaling the disruption of the sinister force. She headed straight for the park, the designated rendezvous point with Josh. But he was not there. "He must have got spooked and left," she whispered to herself, a mix of disappointment and fear settling into her heart. She found a secluded spot in the trees and waited, exhaustion overtaking her. Sleep claimed her swiftly, a brief escape from the nightmare unfolding around her. A noise in the park jolted her awake. Peering from behind the trees, she saw a figure walking around the park. It was Josh. "Josh!" she yelled, relief flooding her voice. She ran towards him, her heart swelling with hope. But as she approached, Josh raised his arm and let out a loud scream, and smiled, that eerie, unnerving smile. Emily's heart sank. "No!" she cried, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. As she turned to flee, she saw the entire street converging on her, blocking her exit. The neighbors, each bearing the same grotesque smile, slowly advancing towards her. Emily stood there, trapped and heartbroken. The realization that her brother, her last beacon of hope, had fallen to the same fate as the others was devastating. She understood then that the curse was relentless, a force that consumed everything it touched. The spectral light from the soul chest had only been a temporary disruption. The ancient pact was still in force, seeking to claim every soul in its path. As the residents closed in, Emily braced herself. She knew there was no escape, that she would not give in easily. The fight to save herself and her brother had been in vain, but she would face the end with the same courage that had driven her this far. The final chapter closed on the peaceful Maplewood, now a prison of smiling faces and lost souls, a haunting reminder of the price of forgotten pacts and the relentless pursuit of immortality. And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video, unless of course you're frozen with fear already.